Okay, I have your file in front of me, and what I want to do, let me move my microphone. What I want to do is explain this slot. This is what you called it, so I'm going to call it a slot too. So this slot here, as well as the other slots, I want you to see how I've broken them down. Okay, so first thing, if I zoom into this upper corner, you can see a little bit of gray right where I'm touching. Okay, let me zoom in even more. See how the slot has a white shape around it? Okay, then it goes to a gray shape, which has black on the bottom. Now I want to explain that to you. So in order to look at it from a simple point of view, let's remove the inner detail. There's 3 pieces of inner detail that I can see. All right, so what I want to do is to show you the first one. See this white right here? See this white upper highlight? Okay, that's the first one. See this secondary whitish highlight? That's the second one. And this big dark shape with a gray inside is the third one. So what I've done is I've drawn those paths out, and I've turned them into a different color just so we can talk about the main thing. So I see this thing as 5 things, really. Maybe more, but let me just explain it. A white outer shape to a dark inner shape. That's it. That's all it is. With a big stripe of white, a smaller stripe of white, and a black thing that's over here. So I've turned the 3 items that I call detail things into green. So I want you to look at those, and I've drawn those paths. Now let me zoom in if you can see this. I'm going to turn the green thing off, okay, just so we can talk about it for a second, because I want you to see this in kind of the way that I break it down simply. So I drew the white slot. I'm going to control click it. You can see it right there. There's the upper white slot. Now I named it white slot 1. Then there's a lower white slot 2. Can you see it right there? So it's just this shape that I'm drawing out right there. Okay? Now, let me show you those by just clicking on them. So there is the upper shape. I'm going to hit the P key and hold Control Alt and just click on that path. So you can see how I've drawn that white shape, that first white shape. Okay, now I'm going to click on the second one. Now, I'll click on them again. See how I've drawn the second white shape. Okay, now this black shape, let me click away from that. So I'm going to control click on this gray area here in the path to turn it off. That's how you can turn them on and off. Okay, now this black thing has an outer lighter color. So look what I've done. I have it black shape right there, a big one, and I'll click on it. So you can see how I've just drawn it kind of roughly right there. All right. Now the next one is black shape 2, which is the same shape, but it's inside. Then I have this shape here to account for this gray that goes from light gray back into black. So there's 3 shapes that make up that black shape. Now, what I want you to do is to simply remove those shapes. Let me control click this path to turn it off. I want to, just like I colored it green, which is why I colored it green, I want you to look and see how this is just a big whitish rectangle on an angle. You call it a slot, I call it a slot too, with a dark thing. So let's now do both of those, and I've even named the layers. So I've turned off your Deanna folder. It wasn't bad, it's just a little bit more complicated than what it needed to be. So let me turn off this green shape. And now I'm going to turn off the Clicky Copy. So what I first need to do is to establish more gray on the top. So way down here, below your body, which I'm turning off, I have a behind slot. I'll even name it behind slot gray. Now, look what I did. I actually made a copy of your whole toaster path right there. See it right there? Now I'm going to control click it. Okay. Now I'm going to click on the Clicky Copy, zoom in to this area right here, hit the B key, and grab this gray color right there. Okay, just grab it. I'm grabbing a darker gray, even though that's a lighter gray, because I can always turn the opacity down, right? So let me turn off the Clicky Copy, Now let me move this over so I can get the whole thing on screen. Now what I'm going to do is hit Control H to turn off the selection and make my brush big, just with the bracket keys. And I'm going to paint this gray on the top a little stronger than what you did. Okay? Now for some reason it's not letting me paint more on it. So what I need to do is to move it above the body. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I've painted it now, and I don't mind how dark it is. Okay, I don't mind. Now, I kind of got too much gray on the front of this, so I need to add a layer mask to it, Deanna, and remove it. See, look at, I've kind of messed up your red. See how I messed up the red? Well, I'll fix that right now. So all I do is deselect, add a layer mask, right, and paint black here just to take away that gray that I put in there. So I'm just kind of erasing, but I don't want to use the word erase. I'm just taking away that gray paint on the layer mask. See the layer mask? It just removed that gray. So now I have a good basis for that gray. Now I can actually remove some opacity from it just to make it a little bit lighter. But I need that gray in the back to make the slots work. Okay, so let's click to the first slot layer. All right, so now I need to put a copy of the slot. Now you've seen me do this before. So I'm going to click to the Clicky Copy, right? Hit the M key for marquee, and I'm going to make a marquee rectangle around this slot right there. Now I'm going to click to your image right there in the Clicky Copy. Okay, click it. Then hit Command or Control J. Okay, now I hit the V key and I can move this down. So at least I have the slot in front of me. Now I don't need the Clicky Copy. Now I can see what I'm painting. That was important. So I trash these all the time, but I use the Command or Control J click and make a marquee. See the marquee tool? I made a marquee around that image right there. So I had the Clicky Copy on. I made a rectangle, and I hit Command or Control J to make a copy. Then I hit the V key and I moved it up for this one right here. Okay, cool. Now let's now make this happen. So I click to the white outer layer. I'm going to Control or Command click to turn that main slot, see it right there? I'm clicking on it right there. I called it main slot. I could call it main white slot. Now I'm going to make a selection of it. I'm going to show you by turning on the Clicky Copy that it's just white. So I make sure that I hit the B key, right? I hold Alt and I grab the white background and I just hit Alt backspace. Now I have a big white shape. That's the beginning of it. See how I drew it real nice right there? Now I can add a layer mask to it and remove some. See, in this corner here, it should be removed a little bit. So if I add a layer mask to it in a second, you can see how I can remove some of that white in the corner. I'll do it right now. So I Control D the selection. You have to Control D it, right? Add a layer mask. Take a small paintbrush right here. Let me zoom in. Let me turn on the Clicky Copy and see where the gray goes away. And now watch how I'm going to take that gray away from the corner. So I'm turning off the Clicky Copy, make sure I'm on the layer mask, and I remove some of that gray, that white. Now I have a nice little gray shape right there, and you can see it. Okay, that was not a big deal. And I don't have to do the inside. Now let's Gaussian blur, meaning I don't have to take any of the white away from the inside because the other layers will cover it up. Okay, and I may have to do more painting on this white layer. But now I go and click on the gray black layer. When I called it gray black because it literally is gray to black. So let's go ahead and do it. So I grab the B key, or press the B key, hold Alt and grab that gray. Now, I made another selection, and I want to explain to you how I made it. I think you will understand easily. So I had the main slot drawn, and I made it into a selection, right? So you can see the selection right there. Now I want to use Select, Modify, Contract to actually make the inner one, which I used as 4 pixels on a contract. And I click OK. Then I saved it under Select and Save Selection, and here it is right down here. Whoops. Here it is right down here. I called it main slot number 2. See it right there? Okay. So let me click to my image right over there. So now it's got rid of the red color, right? And I can control click on that. Now I have the gray that I need. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to use black and gray to make this thing work. So I turn off the Clicky Copy. Am I on the right layer? Yes. So I hit Alt Backspace. Now I have the gray. Now look at our little copy down here. It gets darker on the bottom. So I'm going to make my brush bigger. Okay, cool. Grab the black. I'll hit Command or Control H so I don't have to see that. And now look at how I can add this dark on the bottom and just keep on painting until it gets dark enough to go almost all the way to black on the bottom. Yes, I'm breaking my own rule about 2 colors on the same layer, but it didn't take very much. I even have to get darker with it, and that's what you didn't have. I'm getting a little black with it, so now I went back and I used my eyedropper to grab more black. Now, do you see how that now has the same feel? See how the black goes up to gray right here? See how my black goes up to gray? Let me bring a little bit more darkness up by just painting like that. Now that's it. Now I need to Gaussian blur each one of these by 1 pixel. So I need to Gaussian blur, watch this, this image and this image. Both of these need to Gaussian blur by 1 or 2 pixels. So let's start with the gray. So I'm going to deselect, you have to deselect, Brian, and go Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur that by, not 12 pixels, my goodness. Let's go to 2 pixels. That's probably pretty good, 1.6. Okay, now let me zoom in. Now I need to take this white and do the same thing. So let's now click on the white part of the layer right here, right there, not the layer mask, but the white. See the white right there? Okay. Now let's go to Filter and Gaussian Blur again, and maybe I'll just go to 1 pixel on that, just 1. Okay, now I've gotten a nice feel. Okay, there is the Clicky Copy turning on and off. Okay, now let's paint the white slots, the 2 white slots that I talked about. Okay, so I have now 2 layers. Here, look, I'm going to be painting white slot 1. See it over here in the path? So I'm going to double click the name right there and hit Control C. Click over here and hit Control V. Okay, I'll click up to layer 6 and I want it to be white slot number 2. So I double click this one in the path palette, copy it, go over here and paste it. And now hit the return key and I'll save the file. Okay, so let's paint those slots. Now I click to white slot 1. I make a selection by control clicking it right here. Okay, I just did. Now I'm going to paint it in white, Gaussian blur it, and then remove some of it. See how some of the white is gone right there? Well, let's just do that. Let's just make it happen. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see everything. Hit Control H to turn it off. Grab the white right from that color right there. Good. See how I grabbed the white right from right there? So I held the Alt key in the brush and clicked it. Now I'll just Option or Alt Delete. Okay. Now I need to Gaussian blur it and remove some of it. So deselect, Brian. Gaussian blur it by 1 pixel. Now, do you remember how I just did 1 pixel for the other one? Well, I don't have to go down to blur and Gaussian blur. I can just use this one because this one up here remembers the last one used. So now I've Gaussian blurred that by 1 pixel. Now, let's add a layer mask. Now, if I zoom in, I can use the Clicky Copy to take away some paint. So let me make the brush bigger. Now, I'm going to leave the Clicky Copy on, but look at how I'm painting on the layer mask. So all I need to do is run my brush, can't even see how it's working right now, run my brush right there and look at how I've removed some. Now I removed too much. So I'm going to take the X key and put a little bit back. Just a little bit. Okay, now you see that I painted on the layer mask on white slot 1. So there's white slot number 1. Isn't that kind of pretty? Okay, now let's see over here how it gets a little bit more diffused. So I'm going to actually take the black, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on the layer mask, which I am, and I'm just going to remove, whoops, I have to hit the X key. I'm going to remove a little bit of that paint over here so it looks like it's kind of just diffusing itself. Okay, now let's go do the other one. So I click to white slot 2, I make a selection of white slot number 2, and I do the exact same thing. So let me zoom in and grab this white, which I'm going to probably get rid of most of it, meaning it's going to have to get rid of a little bit. So I'm going to make sure I'm on the layer, Alt backspace. Let's Gaussian blur it by a couple pixels. Okay, one more even. So let's go one more pixel. Let's even go one more pixel. There, I Gaussian blurred it 3 times. Now what do I need over there? I need a layer mask. So I must deselect, add the layer mask, turn on the Clicky Copy, and then remove some of that, like right there, and then keep on turning on and off the Clicky Copy until I like how I see it. Now let's make a smaller brush, because you see how it gets a little bit, there's a little gray streak right, let me point to it, right there. Well, all I have to do is make my brush small and just paint out some of that white. There it is. Now that's it. Now there's the 2 white shapes that I kind of think are pretty. Now let's start by painting the 3 layers, it might take 3 layers, that are going to be for the black shape. And I'm just going to call it black shape. So I'm going to Control C that, call this black shape 1. I'm going to call this black shape 2. And I'm going to call this black shape 3. Okay, now let's start with the big black shape first. Okay, now I'm going to try to tell you something here, and let me turn off my path. So I Control click the path over here to turn it off. Now let's go in here. See how this is really a black shape with a highlight on the top? So I'm going to put that black shape, I'm thinking, I'm going to put it right here. So I'm going to put the main black shape in the middle. The gray shape, which is right there, is going to be on top, but I'm going to put this highlight color on the bottom. Now I could put it on the top, I guess that's okay, but I'm going to do what I just said. So I'm clicking to this middle shape. I'm going to go grab the middle path, hit the B key, grab this color right here, turn off the Clicky Copy, and just fill. So Alt backspace. Now let's Gaussian blur it so it looks good. So let's go to Filter, Gaussian blur. 1 is good, but 2 is going to be better. So I'm just going to keep on adding 1 each time. That looks pretty. Now let's click to the top shape. Let me back off here so I can see that top shape and see the gray. See the gray right there? In fact, let me take that little copy here that I'm clicking to, hit the V key, make sure I deselect, Brian. You have to make sure you deselect before you move something. And I'm going to move this closer so I can zoom in and we can see them both. Okay, so I click to the top layer, which is going to be the gray. I have the shape drawn, which is right here, and I'm going to make a selection of it. Now, I could fill it with a solid gray, but I don't think that's necessary. So I'm going to take the B key, grab this lighter gray right there by holding Alt, make my brush bigger, and I'm going to turn this off for a minute, hit Control H, and I'm going to paint on here. Look at how I'm painting, and I'm not going to flood it in there. Okay, see how I'm not flooding it? Now I'm going to get a little bit lighter on the edge, so I grab a lighter gray or a white, and I'm just going to add that little bit of lightness on the outer part right there. Now let me deselect. Now guess what? I'm going to Gaussian blur that. And I don't even have to add a layer mask because I don't have to take away anything. Okay, so that was cool. Now let me go filter, Gaussian blur, and I think that's enough. Now you see how we've got the whole shape painted. So let me turn this off, and now there is the shape that's painted. Now watch how I take all of these shapes and make them into the other ones. Okay, so everything here from this point right there, from the white outer shape all the way to here, and I shift clicked all these layers because that's that slot. Now I'm going to make a folder, and I'm going to call that folder right there. See, I'm turning it off and on. I'm going to call it slot 1. Now watch how I turn slot 1 into slot number 2. So I take it and duplicate it. Now I'm going to call this slot number 2. Now I'm going to take the V key, and while I'm clicked on this layer, which is a folder which has all these layers in it, I'm going to move it over. Now I'm going to turn on the Clicky Copy, and I'm going to try to fit that slot. And there's something I'm going to have to do to show you something. Okay, so in this case, I want to put the slot, watch this, I'm going to take the slot above the Clicky Copy for a second. Do you see how I did that? I took the slot above the Clicky Copy. See that? Okay, now I can line up the back side. Now watch how cool this is. Now I'm going to turn off the slot that I just added. Now what I have to do is add a layer mask to the folder. Okay, so watch how I do that. I just click. Now I have a layer mask on the folder. Now I'm going to use it in a second, but I'm going to draw a path, and I want you to understand what I'm doing. Look at how I'm going to draw a path right here for the front of the slot. Now do you see how I did that? For the front of the slot. Now I'm going to make a big path around the whole thing. See that? Now let's go down in the path palette, make it into a path, so I can now have it, make a selection of it. Okay, now watch this please. I'm going to turn on that slot. Now do you see what I'm going to take away from it? So if I take the B key and I paint black on the layer mask, it will remove this much of that slot. And you might have to watch this a couple times. Let me make the flow up to about 20 temporarily. You know I keep it about 8. But I'm going to hit Control H and show you a beautiful, amazing, I'm not even going to call it a trick. I'm just going to call it a way of making that copied folder fit the art. Now, let me turn off the Clicky Copy. Do you see how I have the second slot in there? Now, if we take this folder and we duplicate it, it'll work for the third slot, and all I have to do is move this layer mask. I know that was a lot to understand. So now, let me turn on the Clicky Copy. Okay, there's the third slot. Let's take the whole folder for slot 2 and duplicate it. Now I'm going to call it, guess what? Slot number 3. Now, I know this is kind of new, but watch me hit the V key. Okay, remember, my slots are above the Clicky Copy. Isn't that cool? I'm going to take the third slot and put it over here. Now, do you see how I did that? I'm taking the third slot and lining it up to the third slot, and that's fine right there. Actually, it fits just about perfect. Now, all I have to do is possibly turn it a little bit. So I'm going to hit Control T. Now, that means to transform, right? So if I turn it slightly, I now have it fitting really nice. Now, if I turn it off and on, I can see that I have to move the mask a little bit. I know this is hard to understand, but I'm going to click on the mask only. hit the V key, and look at how I can actually take the mask and I can, I didn't move. Oh, I'm sorry, Deanna, I have to tell you something different. Well, it's not different, it's additional, okay? I want to use the V key to move this mask, but I don't want the slot art to move. So you see this link button? I want to introduce you to it. So if I unlink it right there, so there's no link button, I'm going to click on the mask, and now do you see how I can move the mask all by itself to match the reference? So now I'm going to lift it up right about there, and I pretty much matched the reference. Now I have to add more black to it because it's showing right there. So I have to add more black and take away that little bit of art that was still left over. And there's your third slot. So I used your first slot. Let me turn off the Clicky Copy. I used your first slot to make the next two slots. And that is pretty cool. I can do the same thing for the fourth slot. So all I have to do is grab slot 3, and it's a folder, right? Duplicate it, rename it slot number 4. Now I'm going to click, this is important, I need to click the link back on. Now I hit the V key, turn on the Clicky Copy, and move this slot over to that slot. And I have the 4 slots. All I have to do is take a little bit of this slot away. Okay, take it away. So again, this is going to be a little bit hard to understand, but I'm going to unlink it, click to the layer mask, and move that layer mask up a little bit to go like that. And now do you see how by me moving the layer mask, I made the 4th slot? Now that's pretty cool. I'll put the link back on both just because I don't want to leave it unlinked. You may have to watch that again, but you see how I have, let me turn off the Clicky Copy, 4 slots. Now I'm going to take the Clicky Copy and put it back where it was up there. So here is the artwork that I just did with you. Okay? And it works beautiful. So you might have to watch this again to see how I broke down those shapes, but there they are. Thanks.